in from the waiting room. Thank you for joining us today for our conversation on the impact of media and video on young children. I'm Rena Large from the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative, and this call is the last of our weekly call series for funders related to COVID-19 topics. And we're really excited today to have media impact funders joining us for this conversation. A lot of our conversations this summer have been focused on virtual connections with children and families, and how do we do that in the absence of in-person, and how do we do it better, and how do we do it with in-person. And so we're excited to have this continued conversation. I would like to take a moment to introduce Roshni Melia from Media Impact Funders. If you would like to say a few words of welcome as well.
Sure. Thanks very much for the introduction, Rena. As you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned it, but I'm a program consultant with Media Impact Funders, and I want to thank you guys for inviting us to co-host this session. The content of this session is really of interest to us because we closely follow trends in impact assessment, and our funders care about the impact of their investment, but often don't know how to or the best way to measure that. So we're grateful for the opportunity to listen in, as several of our members are interested in the impact of media on children. We hope to take back whatever we've learned back to our network. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, MIF is a philanthropic serving organization that supports funders committed to effective use and support of media in the public interest. For example, you may remember in Flint, Michigan, reports of unsafe drinking water were being ignored. The Ford Foundation responded by funding the hiring of an investigative reporter at the ACLU of Michigan, and the result was the uncovering of a national scandal and the political upheaval that ensued. So our role in media and philanthropy is to convene funders to learn from each other, collaborate, and strengthen the field of practice. Our members support a range of media forms, including journalism, documentary films, public media, storytelling, technology, and more. But many of our members don't consider themselves media funders. But rather they support media to advance their programmatic missions. So I want to thank you again for this opportunity, Rena, for allowing us to co-sponsor this, and I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. And I would also like to thank Ellen Roche from the Trust for Learning. Ellen is one of our members at the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative, and we often have topics suggested to us, or we become aware of new research, new reports from our members, and Ellen suggested this topic because of some work that she is doing. And Ellen, would you like to say a few words?
Hi everybody, it's good to see a lot of familiar faces in the chat. I will just briefly mention, so I work at Trust for Learning. We are a philanthropic partnership, and our whole mission is to expand relational, play-based, developmental kinds of approaches to serve underserved children. And I think for me, because we were so focused on in-person work, I would sort of see research about young children and technology, young children and screens and media, and I didn't always read it very carefully or pay a lot of attention. And of course, COVID has hit. I also had the fortune of taking Dr. Barr's course at Georgetown on early childhood development, which has kind of opened my eyes to the research on young children and technology, and helped me see it through more of an equity lens, particularly thinking about kids who are at a distance from family members, from educators, and thinking about ways that technology can create greater equity in terms of learning and child development, not just sort of who has laptops and who doesn't, but how can we kind of apply child development principles to technology for kids who are at a distance for various reasons, from kind of COVID to incarceration and kids experiencing refugee situations and immigrant families, people who are ill and can't be near their grandchildren or children. So I've been so thrilled to learn more about the science of this, and I'm excited to hear from Rachel and Terry and really think through this sort of COVID lens, but also beyond what kind of equity questions this might prompt for us.
Great, thank you. And with that, I'm really pleased to introduce our guest speakers today, Rachel Barr from Georgetown University and Terry Herrick from Youth Law Center. And they're going to talk with us about some research that they're working on and examples from systems that use virtual technology with youth and families. And then we're going to have some open discussion and Q&A. So we will be monitoring the chat during the presentation. And if you have something on your mind, pop it into chat. We'll keep track of that, and then we'll open up for discussion afterwards. So with that, I will turn it over to Rachel.
Hello, I'm really delighted to be here and to share a little bit with everybody about the science of media and early child development, and really thinking about, as Ellen pointed out, strategies to keep families connected during COVID and beyond. And we actually do know quite a lot about development in children and media, and this can be best summarized really by Lisa Guernsey's 3 C's. And this is what will just sort of the frame to keep in mind this whole hour, is that we really need to consider the content that is being shared with the child. Is it age appropriate? Is it interesting to the child? We need to think of the actual child themselves. What is their age? What is their mobility? What is their language? What are their interests? And then what is the context? And I think probably the context is the most important thing that we want to keep in mind, especially at this time, while we're all trying to stay connected. We all know what it's like now in this strange Zoom world that we're all living in. And how is it that families can be supported and children can be supported in using technology to stay connected, to learn, and to apply what we know about child development to that situation. So I'm just going to, this is a slide here that really just summarizes sort of the past 20 years of research in learning and media from about 0 to 4 years of age, or 0 to 5 years of age. And what we have observed is that they can learn from media. So if we just start at this bottom left-hand corner here in the red, they can learn from media from as young as 6 months, and we can use like a monkey see, monkey do imitation task. We can show a baby something on a screen and then see if they copy us in real life. And as I said, by 6 months they can. However, they learn significantly less than if we go to the top right here in the green. The live interaction is the gold standard. This is where all of the perceptual cues, all of the tactile cues, visual, auditory, and all of the social features that support learning are in place. And so, not surprisingly, although they can learn, they learn significantly less from video and other screens, at least through 4 or 5 years of age, than they do from a live interaction. However, if we consider the 3 C's and how we can coordinate and support learning, then we can actually quite well approximate good learning if we design tablets well with features that have good affordances to help children's attention, to guide them, to have appropriate content that follows principles of learning. But probably the thing I want to focus on most today is video chat. And I'm going to talk about video chat that is supported with social scaffolds. And by that, what I mean is that there are 2 people. There are people on either side of the screen that are supporting the baby and young child in their learning and interaction. And we really know that video chat can support connections and learning at a distance. And this research is not new. I became personally interested in it when I myself had children. You might notice I don't have an American accent. My parents live in New Zealand, and I wanted to stay connected with them when I had children. However, from a research lens, I have been studying this for at least the last decade. But we know really a great deal from military families. So video chat was actually developed by the military originally, and many families have stayed connected while personnel have been deployed. We also know that because we have these back and forth contingencies, that when parents are on both sides of the screen, so we can have a parent supporting the baby here while she's interacting with her grandparent on the other side of the screen. And when there are supportive adults on either side of the screen, we can really greatly reduce any learning deficits, and we can maintain this back and forth. So we're really at the point now where media-based interventions can be effective if we think through the capacity for children and adults to learn from media and how to support that learning and engagement. So about 10 years ago, I started working on the Just Beginning program, and it's colloquially known as Baby Elmo because we use Sesame Street materials that include Baby Elmo and his dad. And this program was initially developed for incarcerated teen fathers in order to help support them in their learning. And I'm going to hand off to Terry Harak now, my long-term colleague who's been working on Just Beginning with me, to describe to you how Just Beginning was initially implemented with the media embedded, but then during COVID, how that was translated into video chat interactions that could still support our families staying connected at a distance. So Terry, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks Rachel. And I already see one of our participants, Kay, has a picture with Baby Elmo in it for your Zoom profile. So that's awesome to see. In a way, Baby Elmo has showed up to us too. So this is what our play spaces look like in facilities and communities. So we've done this intervention in both communities and juvenile facilities. And our first kind of step is creating this space where dads and kids can have positive interactions. So not these cold, sterile rooms, but a real playroom that's going to help support that growth and development that we want to see between dad and child. The one here on the far left is what we call a pop-up space. It can be made really quickly and then broken down. In the middle, this is one of the permanent rooms at one of our facilities. We have this room up like this all the time for dads and kids to be able to connect. And this is one of my favorite ones on the end here. This is from Riverside, California, and the dads did all the painting in this room, dads in the facilities. And part of our curriculum is a session on praise and encouragement, which for so many of our incarcerated youth, they've never experienced having anyone praise or encourage them. And the only way that they've seen that is through this Baby Elmo, Sesame Street videos, and the Just Beginning videos that we use. And so they decided to paint this on the wall so that when their child comes in and they're practicing this new skill, which for many of us sounds so easy to be able to look at your baby and say, I love you, I'm proud of you. But for our young dads who've never heard that, it can be really hard. So they look at Elmo and they got Baby Elmo there and Daddy Elmo, and they just read those words, I'm proud of you. So let's kind of take a look and see what our sessions look like in action. This is, I love my job. I bring a ton of enthusiasm to this because it's just such beautiful work. And when I see these photos, this is just, my heart melts. These are our fathers in action with their babies. You can see this one here on the right. So dad is reaching down because dad's noticing what his baby girl's interested in. And then he's gonna follow into her lead and play with that little blue squishy toy that she's picked up. If I was showing you video today, you'd be able to hear that, or dad would say, oh, great job, you picked up that blue toy. And really kind of put our curriculum into action. On this top one in the left here is dad getting down on eye level with his child. Sometimes our visits can start where dad doesn't know what to do, but because they've had this opportunity of seeing the Sesame Street videos, which also we incorporate other videos, not just the cartoon characters, but they've had a chance to be able to watch that and say, okay, how am I going to interact with my baby? What did I notice from the video? Oh, I've noticed that Daddy Elmo or Grandma Bigford has gotten down on eye level, gotten close with the baby. And so that's what this dad is doing here, talking back and forth, engaging with the baby. Down here, we have a dad who's holding his daughter. It takes a lot of work to get to this point. This is one of our dads in a facility who is now able to hold his daughter, show her this praise and affection, and hold her tight, and they're looking at a screen together playing a game. So that's what our sessions look like in action. And let's kind of take a look at how we started to use media. So prior to COVID, and I would say we were ahead of the game a little bit. No one saw COVID coming to our worlds, but we were already using media and technology. On the right side here is an app called Dad Time that was designed particular for our program. And this was used in our community setting. Now, I could have showed you just a regular kind of screenshot or something from our developers, but I wanted to show you a picture of the Dad Time app in a father's hand. I was on a site visit, and all the dads were gathered around outside. All of them had their phones and were talking and saying, hey, what's yours doing? Did yours grow any? What did you do last week? And I was pretty sure that they were talking about Candy Crush or some other type of game. And to see that all these men, all these dads were congregating and talking about their Dad Time app. Every time you had a session, every time you completed a session or a visit, you got a new leaf on your app. So your tree starts to grow. So you can see here it says, your time together with your baby at Just Beginnings meant a lot to him. Your relationship and your tree is growing. So dads really got into that app. Also on second, third visits, you would get tips and skills that the app would say, oh, remember you learned this session on talk. Make sure to talk to your baby or label things around you. So it was really helpful, and it's amazing that we use technology and media and so many other things, and we don't give much thought to using them with this population. And the response was incredible. Over here to the left, this is a dad doing virtual programming. COVID's had a huge impact on our juveniles who are incarcerated. Facilities are on very high lockdowns, and we had to find a way to get creative and how to get programming to our youth. So we started doing virtual programming. And so this is a young man participating in virtual programming there. So that's kind of how we were using media before. I just want to quickly say before we go to the next slide, we also used a remote training with our facilitators, coaching them on how to work with dads. So we had this base, which I feel it was very cutting edge of using media with this population. Then COVID comes and we're a little more prepared to respond to it. So I want to show you what that looks like. Another way that we were using media is we had a book program for our incarcerated dads. So they would read to their babies, and then we'd send a digital recording of that home. The baby would also get the book, the caregiver would get the book, and then we always tried to get kind of a toy. One theme, we did Baby Shark, so that everyone got little backpacks and books, and of course, everyone was singing the song forever. So we were doing this program, and then we said, okay, COVID's hit, we've got these materials, we've got these things that we've used for the book program. How do we repurpose them in COVID? Because visits are absolutely important. We cannot stop visitation. And we knew that we had to create just like we had to create the space from the beginning that I showed you, we had to create a virtual space also that was child and parent friendly. We didn't want a dad and a blank wall behind him. It's not enough to give a dad or to give a child a device. We have to give them the coaching, the skills, the curriculum that goes with it, and kind of create that environment and space. So that's now when dads get visits, they get visits that look like this. So I want to show you what a visit looks like. So this is a young man. It's for confidence reasons I can't show a ton of pics of families. So I wish I could show a better visit, but this is a young man having a visit with his mom, and eventually baby comes in, and then they're able to engage and interact. And because we have this relationship of, I'm at Youth Law Center, Dr. Barr at Georgetown in her research, we've had this over a decade-long relationship of research to practice, but also a relationship with youth and families directed who are impacted by systems. We were able to come together and think about how we change JB, this intervention, and Dr. Barr's research on families visiting at a distance with grandparents and military families makes total sense to apply that and use that for families who are separated, and especially our most vulnerable families, although not everyone is thinking of it that way. So we had these virtual visits happen, and we knew that we had to first shorten them. So usually in a facility, you have an hour-long visit, maybe on a Saturday, and family comes in. These visits, we needed to shorten them, make it a little easier from the virtual screen for baby and for dad, and we had to increase the frequency. So we're holding visits more often, but shorter visits. And babies, I wish I could get approval to show you some of these videos of kids going up to the screen and blowing daddy kisses. And one of our favorite things of youth to do in this facility is do what they call the daddy dinosaur dance. So dads are actually walking around and roaring and making sounds, and then you see baby on the screen repeat it. It's pretty cute to see. So I want to kind of show you where this all kind of ends on the next slide. And these are our young men, our graduates, our participants at home in their communities with their families. And this is exactly what we want and what we're aiming for. And media has allowed us as a tool to empower families to get home and into their communities. This young man here on the right, just within a couple weeks, was released. He had virtual visits with his child. So he's not going home as a stranger. He's not going home as a father that child hasn't seen him in months. He's going home as daddy who you saw on the screen and did dinosaur dance and played with. And so you're able to get that. Baby runs right up to dad. This one on the left is a graduate from our community program, and the whole family was just so proud holding this. And we have a great video of this family when we asked him, what was your biggest takeaway from this program? And he said, I really learned how to encourage my son. I know how important that is for him. And I never thought of his development that way. I focused more on the provider piece, making sure I had an income, making sure I could get his diapers. I never thought about making sure I could get that time to play with him. So that's kind of our end, what we want. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Barr before we open up for questions. I'm happy to answer questions and talk more about our program and how we've used media really as an equity strategy to work with our youth.
Thanks so much, Terry. And so just to sum it all up, if we go back to those 3 C's, and we can just think, okay, well, who is the child? What is the content that can be shared? In video chat, it can be very tailored content. What exactly is the child interested in right now? They can do the dinosaur dance together. And what is the context? How do we support parents on both sides of the screen? And this, we focus very much on young children and learning via video chat, but the same can be said around learning around various other types of media, because we know a lot about learning. We know about the difficulty that children face when they're having to translate all of this information across screens. And when we support families and we support teachers in sharing that information, we can enhance learning and maintain relationships. And we just wanted to share how media could be a useful tool if we take into consideration the science of learning and development. And so we welcome any and all questions. I have about another 100 slides, but I wanted to make sure that we answer questions that you wanted to hear about. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rachel and Terry. If you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question, you are welcome to do that. We're a small enough crowd. I think that would be easy. You can also type questions into chat, and I will help monitor chat. In the meantime, do we have any immediate questions?
I'll kick us off with one. This is Ellen again from Trust for Learning, which I think is a difficult question, and one that like educators all over the country are figuring out real time. But do either of you have a sense of either research on kind of one-to-many classroom interactions over Zoom? And I haven't seen a ton. I'm sure we're going to have a lot more, in 6 months or a year. But if not, like just sort of extrapolating some of the best practices from what we do know, what might be some of those things that we can do to support educators who, my best friend's daughter is 3 and she's going to pre-K over Zoom. Like this is her introduction to school, so any of those best practices that educators can use, or just I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, so you're right. Like the video chat research has really focused on sort of these one-to-one situations where you would convey information from one adult to the child on the other side of the screen. And now educators from preschool through to tertiary are having to face the sort of Zoom room of people and making sure to sort of monitor and track multiple people at once. So we don't have a lot of information yet, but we do have a couple of things that could sort of help us. So one thing is that we had done a study with 4 to 8 year olds looking at learning via face-to-face interactions or via video chat. These were one-on-one interactions, but we imaged children's brains at the time using near-infrared spectroscopy, so just light going in. And what we found that I think is quite important is we had these fairly difficult sequences that children had to learn, and they got increasingly difficult across time. We measured their behaviour, and the learning was equal from video chat and from live. And these are 4 to 8 year olds. So they absolutely can learn under those conditions. Now, the second piece of it is that you won't be surprised about is that the brains responded differently under these 2 learning conditions. And all of us have experienced this in Zoom. It is not the same thing. This is a different problem that the brain has to solve in order to acquire the same amount of information. But I think the takeaway is they can learn. It is a different problem. And then the second thing that we know from a series of research is that repetition of structure, we know this from a lot of research on television, is that repetition of structure and content supports learning. So let's take the example of Blue's Clues. So in Blue's Clues, originally these programs were made, and they took 3 to 5 year olds and they showed them the episode once. And 3 year olds had no clue what the clue was, excuse the pun. However, they showed that over the next 5 days, and by the end of the week, the 3 year olds had actually figured out the clues. That repetition, and we know this from babies as young as 12 months to kids around 5 years, this repetition of content can actually help them overcome some of this learning deficit. And I think that's important for educators to think about, that it may not be as acquired as quickly or as much. And then the third piece that I think we can take from what we know is that, and I did allude to this, and Terry very much described this, is that caregivers on both sides of the screen may be necessary. Now, that's not going to be possible 24/7. It's not going to be every day your child is in school that the parent can be side by side. But occasionally, maybe at the beginning of the day or at the end of the lesson, if a caregiver can be there to support the child on the same side of the screen, to say, oh, she's talking about X, or afterwards particularly to say, oh, the class today was about leaves. We're here in the middle of autumn and it's at fall and the leaves are all falling and there's crunchy leaves and everything else. And in class, they're talking about leaves. If the caregiver can then say, okay, let's go outside and stomp in the leaves, this helps this child with this problem of transferring to the screen, from the screen to the real world. And so educators are very great at bringing out and thinking about activities like that, and inviting parents in to say, okay, today's about leaves. Go out and stomp in the leaves, to help the children make that bridge between what they're seeing on the screen and what is going on in their real world, because that's where we know that they have difficulty transferring and learning. So repetition, a little bit of caregiver support, transfer into the real world, and then realizing that this is a very difficult and different problem for the brain to solve. I think taking all those things in mind are important principles that we can apply to thinking about education. And actually, sorry, there's one, can I do one more? The one other one is also that there is a great deal of media content that has been well developed. So we've focused on Sesame Street because it's like 40 years, 50 years of research on development of that product. And again, this is where teachers are really great at sort of figuring out what sort of content they can use. So utilizing some of those videos, but short clips, short amounts, reasonable amount of content that then is tied back to the real world. So I think all of those things are things that educators are learning and applying across time, but we're not starting from zero. We do know about things that they can learn and things that are challenging for them to learn.
I think we have a question in the chat box, Rachel, that I think we can both talk about a little bit. It's, have you checked in with dads a year or more after this program to see behaviors are still changed? So I'll want to give a little introduction, then I know when I turn it over to the researcher and have Rachel answer it, but I do want to say that in the early years of Just Beginnings, Rachel and her team did a study that she can talk about the behavior change of youth in our program. And as a person on the ground implementing, I can tell you what that kind of looks like is where we had youth with high infractions, youth who were not behaving well in a facility. And I went in on a site visit once and there was a young man, JB dad, who was pulling down the TV and he was angry and trying to rip off the plastic to it. And he was really angry because his visit wasn't gonna happen. And in the beginning, they tried to use visits as kind of a carrot and a stick for behavior. Sat down with this young man, immediately used his child's name. For the sake of this conversation, I'll say it's Rachel. And I said, how's Rachel doing? And just his whole demeanor physically changed. And Rachel's research and study showed how youth, when they started into the program, how over the course of time, they had less infractions. On the second piece, Nancy, to really answer your question, I'm gonna turn it to Rachel to talk about our study in Pennsylvania, New York, and California, where we are following dads.
Yeah, and I thought you were actually going to talk about one other dad that I just want to mention as well. So we were able to really see behavior change over the course of their stay within the program. And one dad that I wanted to sort of focus on just to illustrate this is the dad and the daughter came in, and the daughter was 3.5 and she just started recognizing her letters. So you might have noticed on that play area that there were foam letters. So she pulled out the letters and spelled them out. And this was, of course, this was a very joyful thing, except that afterwards, the dad couldn't read himself. And so what he did is he then reached out to the staff who were training him in the JB program and asked, could I get additional reading, because I want to follow in on my brilliant child and how she's learning to read, but I want to join her in that and I can't read. And so he then started getting additional reading program that he hadn't previously been available to him or interested to do. So I think there's a lot of these bi-directional behavioral changes that are occurring within the dad, also in the baby themselves. When you see, we track the program across time, we see as the parents' supportive behaviors go up, it's completely in tandem with the infant engagement. So what Terry said is also we have a study, a randomized trial going on that is finished. We don't know the findings yet, but we did randomly assign, fathers were randomly assigned to either Just Beginning or these great fatherhood programs as usual. And we have been tracking them for 6 to 12 months. So we will have, those findings will be available soon. And we think that'll be much more informative in terms of the long term, because this is a short intervention. However, the reason why we think it could be useful is that the short intervention teaches very skills that are not just for a child of a particular age. These are things that we know about: serve and return, connecting language to actual objects and behaviors, providing encouragement for particular behaviors. So skills that are very much known to be important practices for, and these dads do them incredibly well, learn them really well. Following the lead is the hardest, but then they show a huge spike in that across time. So that's why we think these skills are likely to lead to long-term consequences, but at the end of the trial. So that was, I'm doing these very long answers, but I'm looking also in the chat, and I noticed that Molly said the importance of connecting caregivers and virtual learners between teachers and caregivers, and it really is a really incredible partnership when it works well. And we have also, Terry and I have also been working on what's called the Quality Parenting Initiative, where foster parents or resource parents and biological parents work together. And now we've been attempting to keep that, because that relationship is absolutely necessary to support supervised visits between foster children and their parents, birth parents. And if there's a relationship between the foster parent and the birth parent, then these video chats can be much more interactive and supportive of the child. So everything about the relationship of people on either side of the screen is absolutely fundamental to supporting relationships and supporting learning.
Rachel, we've got another question that comes up often. I think everyone is asking about screen time and ages of children. So the question is, which I know you have research on, the question is, from your research, do you have recommendations on the amount of screen time that is appropriate for children at different ages?
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting question, especially during COVID, right? So Hartshorn just published a paper in 2020, and it said that 73% of parents reported increased use of screen time in their children 0 to 8. So in some ways, sort of the amount of time, it absolutely has increased for all of us across time. However, I think that a really good way to think about screen time is not absolute amount, but what the American Academy of Pediatricians have recommended is to think about all activities across the day. And they've got this really nice media use plan. And so it's developed for kids of different ages. There's a series of questions to walk through. As children get older, you can also include the children in the process. And the question is not how much time, because I know for my kids, if I say it's 2 hours, they'll do 2 hours and 2 minutes. If I say it's 1 hour, they'll do 1 hour and 1 minute. So the amount of time is not so helpful. But if you say, and this is according to the Academy of Pediatrics, if you say, okay, well, what does this child need during the day? So we know they need sleep. We know that they need meals, and that these meals with other people are going to be really beneficial to them socially. We know that they have to engage in some form of education. We know that outdoor play or physical play is going to be really important. And how do you sort of build the whole day and then think of how media can complement or be useful? Maybe it's really important right now to have a video chat with your granny. And that would be built into the day. And that would be screen time, but it's not all equal. So, but you may not need to play Fortnite for 3 hours, right? So there's a whole sort of discussion about what is the content, what is your child, and then today it's a really rainy day in DC. There's not much that can be done apart from be inside. So it may well be that on rainy days, that's when, a movie or Sesame Street or Arthur or whatever, you might have an extra half an hour on that. And then the final thing about screen time is, unfortunately, we have to think about us as adults. So the question is always, how much time should children have? But really, I'm just going to quickly do this. And I'm just going to quickly do that 100 times a day. And we know that parents' media use actually is, if there's an ongoing interaction, obviously parents have to stay connected, especially during COVID. But if there is like 15 minutes where you're saying, okay, this is playtime, then saying, okay, sorry, colleagues, I'm going to be away for 15 minutes, and then having that face-to-face interaction and then going back to the phone is going to be really beneficial, because we know that texting, if it occurs once or twice, it doesn't disrupt. But if it's occurring 100 times a day or 150 times a day during all of your interactions, that's more likely to be disruptive than an extra hour of TV. And the same actually also with background TV. And again, when people are isolated and alone, or during the election, obviously we needed to hear what was going on. But we also know that background TV, just stuff that makes no sense to babies, the babies will be playing and they'll hear the ding or the latest report. They'll look up to the screen. They don't know that Georgia is really important for the election outcome. However, they have been disrupted in their play. And then when the baby asks them something, oh, look, I've got a tower, can you help me balance a bigger one? And the parent's attention is like, what is going to happen next? Then that response is also much slower. that responds to the bid to attention. So background TV and parents' media use needs to be considered in that screen time. And I'm not at all saying that we should be 100% interacting back and forth with our child without any media and be in the dark ages or whatever. I'm just saying it's more sort of a planful, mindful media use that we want to think about rather than a specific amount of time.
That's great. Thank you, Rachel. There's some great comments in the chat box about the work with dads and supporting that parent-child connection and parents as true partners with caregivers and early educators. Thank you for making those comments. There's a question from Nina at Media Impact Funders. She commented that the example of using media to help dads develop socio-emotional skills to connect with their children is very powerful, clearly shows the impact that media can have. How does that apply in the school environment? Aside from learning and the education material, what's the thinking behind using media to help young kids learn critical social skills during remote learning in the absence of in-person peer-to-peer interactions? And I'll just read that for later archive purposes, but if you need to revisit that, you can see in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the million-dollar question at the moment, right? And this is where, you know, talking with early educators, people come up with really clever ideas. So we've, you saw with Terry's examples, and I'll let you give more examples of how that it's not just sitting a child in front of the screen and then that information is transferred. It's the way in which that information is conveyed. And Alan and I have been working on this project called Zoomers and Boomers. And it's about how grandparents and grandbabies are staying connected during COVID. And we've found that the more video chat, the more frequent video chat is associated with feelings of closeness to the child and more feelings of connectiveness. So that's all good. But we are now sort of taking a look at what these video chats actually look like, because grandparents are incredibly creative. So we were on a webinar and the grandparents said, oh, I do a scavenger hunt with a 3-year-old. And a scavenger hunt is a great idea for an educator to do. Go away and get me 3 things that are a circle. And the other things that they came up with were things like hide and seek. I had a video chat with my friend's 2-year-old and my kids, and they were really interested. He was really interested in toy cars. And so believe it or not, this 2-year-old said, okay, let's have a race with toy cars, bearing in mind we're on different sides of the screen. And he said, on your marks, get set, go. And so we all pushed the car and he said, oh, you won that time. Let's have another race. And then we had another race and he said, I won. And so the other thing is that we can learn from the kids, we can learn from grandparents, we can learn from creative educators, and thinking about some of the ways, but it does require adapting, and it does require a lot of prep work, as you saw in Terry's setup. Like if there hadn't been the book reading already there, it would have been quite hard to make that rapid adaptation. But there are some basic tips, like having props, having things to do on the other side of the screen, having games, having motion, actually, particularly for young kids, is really important. Thinking about how can kids move around. And those are the sorts of practices that educators have already figured out in classroom settings. And so brainstorming with educators and figuring out, well, what things have worked, what things haven't worked. And a lot of things don't work. Like, you know, but I always find when I'm asking in a webinar what things have worked is that you generate these incredible list of solutions and we also did this on calls with resource parents and birth parents. They had come up with great ideas: cook together, have a meal together, all sorts of, go play outside and have the call outside. So maybe there is a sunny day at school one day, you could have a session outside. So all of these different creative ways that may not look exactly like regular school, but could be very helpful ways of sort of maintaining interest and motivation. I know that all of us have probably been on 1,000 webinars since March, but how do we kind of make it engaging and so on for young children is the thing. And I think the question that I think is really clever here that Nina raises is, how do you bring together the peers? And again, that's something, there's sort of breakout rooms, they could share objects with each other, they could come up with a secret headline or story or something and then share it back to encourage those breakouts that already are normally happening in a classroom, in order to sort of facilitate those peer-to-peer as well, so that they're not always just faced with this massive screen of many faces. But again, I know that educators across the country have already figured out a lot of these things, and it's a matter of like figuring out how to share information across groups.
Yeah, and just to add with that, with the dads in a visitation context, we've prepped families in advance. We try to send home same toys so that, you know, the toy is the tool. So dad's got this, you know, play car or a ball, and we try to get that home to the families also, and work with the dad on, okay, what do you want to try for this visit? How do you want to play with your baby? So that when we start off the visitation, we've kind of got this icebreaker going, and the dad has some strategies he can try. There's nothing more discouraging when you just put a screen up, there's been no prep, and baby starts crying, or maybe it was time when baby should be eating, and it just kind of all melts and goes wrong. But if we can schedule it for the appropriate time, give dad the tools, and then give co-parents on the other side the tools, it seems to really help and support a good visit.
Yeah, and 0 to 3 has been trying that also at a greater, the 2 to 2, where there definitely is the books on either side of the screen. So having actual real materials on either side of the screen can be really useful too.
And I think we have some more questions.
There's one question that got a little pushed up in the chat, and that is thoughts about taking this program to scale.
Yeah, we would love to. And, you know, we've sort of got a remote training model. We've got, the program is in Spanish and English, and we've really tried to be sort of systematic, working with facilities across time, but also working with community organizations. And we're waiting to find out the results of this randomized controlled trial, just to be really sure that there are effects above and beyond, you know, participating in a good fatherhood responsibility program. So we would really love to do that, given that we've found such encouraging pre-post findings with the dads in the facilities, and hopefully we'll have some more data to share soon from the RCT. And we've actually also, Terry mentioned co-parenting, and so we're also developing another intervention called Connect to Baby, where we consider the mother-child relationship, the father-child relationship, and the mother-father co-parenting relationship, to try and build as many buffers as possible to support that child, and use the same principles that we just talked about in just beginning in both the parent-child interactions, but also in reducing and increasing communication between the co-parents too. So yes, we are always trying to sort of make sure that we're trying to expand the program, so we would like to.
Yeah, and having this remote training model, and we did this before COVID. We were already remote training, and so with that model, that's, you know, a way that we can be more scalable instead of flying all across the country or trying to go places. So we've thought a lot about this, of how we bring it to scale. When I came onto this project, I was really excited about working on it as someone who grew up system involved and impacted. I thought this kind of 2-gen lens and this way of using media, I've spent most of my career trying to kind of plug these holes that I saw in my own life and family, whether it was you know, first I'd say, well, education, and if everyone could just get a good education, or housing, or this, but having a program that really looks at child development and parenting and using that creativity of technology. I've seen the impact on the ground, and so I'm looking forward to the day where it's the norm, especially for our teen dads and teen moms, instead of, you know, just a small program in a few spaces.
I noticed I haven't heard about the YMCA services program. That sounds really like a really interesting program.
Al, you mentioned in the chat that the details are not being worked out of that program. Do you have more you can share? Would you like to share with us, or maybe we can circle back and find a way to share that information out when more details are available? We will definitely circle back. Al Castle is an ECFC member, so for those of you who are not among our members, we will follow up with Al and share out some more information when that becomes available. Thank you for sharing that. Are there other questions for Rachel and Terry? I think we captured everything that was in the chat.
I'll throw in one more real quick. This is Ellen again. You know, as many of us have been focused over the last 9 months on the many sort of layered equity implications of COVID, I know many of us have also been trying to ask ourselves, are there any silver linings? And I heard you, Terry, saying one of the things that you adjusted, I think, because of COVID, was that you made the video chats shorter but more frequent, and then maybe this could lead to more video chat in the future, in addition to hopefully in-person resuming. But I'm just curious, you know, is there anything about all of us being forced online that could like either spark creative thinking for funders, for educators, for researchers, or do you see some of those things where this weird unexpected constraint is creating some sort of inroads in terms of equity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I hate to give COVID any good credit, right? But we were already using media and technology before, and we were just starting to get at virtual visits, advocating for them, for our young people, because it makes sense. These are families that are separated, and whether it's in foster care and we want kids and parents to be reunited, if it's for incarcerated parents or for non-resident fathers. So that's one good thing that has come out of this, because that cannot go away. We need to, you know, post-COVID, whatever that world looks like, even when dads can get face-to-face, which we want, but when families are separated, we can still keep communication and connection, and we should, and kind of shaping what that looks like. And that's kind of what we're learning as we go and doing these virtual visits. But I think they're going to be a thing to stay, and they're going to be a resource for families, for when, if kids do need to come into foster care, you know, they can still, you know, message and connect and FaceTime with their birth parent instead of waiting weeks or months to see them. So I think that is one good thing from all of this, and something that will remain.
Yeah, and I think thinking about how we're adapting, right? So shorter, more frequent, we think is going to be more effective, and it's important when we think about the child's memory system too. We know that they forget media content a little bit more quickly, so reminding them and having more frequent check-ins via video chat might be important to sustain. Shorter, so that everybody isn't Zoom fatigued. Those two things are important based on what we know about just how the visit goes, but also what we know about the memory system that's going to support building that relationship as well. And I think the other thing that is going to be maybe a silver lining afterwards is that we'll probably really appreciate face-to-face after this, because we know that it's kind of a really gold standard, but we're going to really, really love having those face-to-face interactions. And so but we might be more flexible about blending both face-to-face and media learning. And that could be really beneficial in terms of some supports within education systems, providing more access to resources, if we can make sure that digital equity is also available for all.
One of the fathers we worked with, we asked, his experience with virtual visits. What did he miss most about in person? What is he looking forward to see his baby again? And he said what he missed most was the smell of his baby, even if it was not always a pleasant smell. But he would just want to have his baby in his arms again. So it was cute. Yeah.
It's close, but it's definitely not quite the same.
Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. That was a perfect question to come back to the, how do we want to harness the best ideas and strategies from the new virtual world. Are there other questions? We have a few minutes left in our scheduled call time. Are there other questions or comments? Or if not, would Terry and Rachel like to, you sort of gave kind of a concluding, best thoughts just now, but any other suggestions, recommendations, best ideas you want funders to be thinking of as we move forward?
I had mentioned the mindful sort of media practices piece, and some of that has been summarized in 0 to 3 Screen Sense materials. If people, that's completely downloadable and available. Alan and I have written a summary article with a group of video chat researchers on current knowledge in video chat and how it applies in COVID that we'd be willing to share. And if anybody has a new grandbaby or a new parent and wants to be involved in the Zoomers and Boomers study, I would be happy to share that information about that study as well. And Terry, what were your, and you can contact us at any time if you have follow-up questions.
And I would just, we've all gotten thrown into this new world, whether we like it or not. And all of us are learning to adapt and live with it and, think about how we live our daily lives through virtual interactions. But I want everyone to think, just don't forget this population of vulnerable families as we look at using media and how it can help all of us in our lives, but particularly those young people that we work with.
Yeah, can I finish on something with that as well? Because the vulnerable groups and thinking, as Terry had pointed out, remote training could also be another boon to think about just in terms of scalability, but also remote interventions as well, if they're really well supported and have maybe even some hybrid between in-person or the first meeting. And then, because particularly for programs that are going to involve fathers, obviously the 9 to 5 is much more difficult if you've got multiple jobs. And so that remote training that may be, safe for intervention workers to do at night or easier to arrange on the weekend, just thinking about that and working with parents remotely as we get better at figuring out these strategies, I think that could be another boon too, and help support vulnerable families.
Great, thank you so much. We will be sharing out today's recording and the related resources that were mentioned and Rachel and Terry's contact information. And while I have everyone still on the line, I will also mention that ECFC is hosting a post-election briefing with the Alliance for Early Success in the First 5 Years Fund on December 3rd. And we'll share that information when we send out archive information, and it's also available on our website at ecfunders.org. So thank you again to Terry and Rachel for joining us, to Ellen for suggesting the conversation and helping us think about what kinds of things we wanted to share today, and to Media Impact Funders for co-sponsoring with us. We'll look forward to where our work intersects on other topics. Roshni, would you like to say any words in closing?
Just the fact that, this was amazing. Thank you so much for inviting us to do this. And I mean, personally, I learned so much from both Rachel and Terry. So thank you for that. We're going to take back all of this learning to our network and share it. So thank you so much again. Appreciate it.
Completely our pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks.